I turned 40, and instead of a cake or a toast, my mom stood up at our family dinner and read out an eviction notice. Laughter followed. They thought they had finally kicked me out for good. But as they mocked me under the chandelier, they didn't know I had already signed the deed 3 weeks earlier. The house was mine, and their smiles were about to disappear. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of betrayal, ownership, and poetic justice, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that hits deep. What you're about to hear isn't just about a birthday dinner. It's about taking back power in the most unexpected way. Let's begin. I never really made a fuss about birthdays. Maybe it was the years of half-hearted cards or forgotten candles, but turning 40 felt more like a personal checkpoint than a celebration. Still, when my mother insisted on hosting a family dinner at the old house, the one I grew up in, the one she always reminded me was hers, I agreed, mostly out of obligation. I didn't expect gifts. I didn't expect affection. But I didn't expect a setup either. The whole thing started off quiet, a bit too formal, like everyone had rehearsed something I didn't know I was a part of. That uneasy feeling crawled into my chest the moment I walked in. The dining table had been dressed with more elegance than usual. Crystal glasses, candles, even those silver napkin holders she only brought out for the holidays. My brother and his wife sat on one side, my aunt and cousins on the other. They gave me small smiles, not warm ones, more like smug acknowledgments. I felt like I had interrupted a meeting. Something was off. Still, I smiled, sat down, played my part like I always had. I had no reason to suspect they were building up to the moment they thought would finally humiliate me. Dinner was roast beef, mashed potatoes, and overcooked green beans, my least favorite meal, which I hadn't touched since I moved out over a decade ago. My mother poured me a glass of wine like she was being generous. To 40 years, she said in a tone too sweet to be sincere. May this next decade bring you clarity, growth, and a fresh start. Everyone clinked glasses. Everyone except me. I sipped the wine because refusing it would have sparked questions, and I had no patience for another lecture about being ungrateful. I had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive in that house was to stay quiet and let them think they were winning. Then came the speech. My mother stood, her back straight, voice calm. We've all seen how hard it's been for you lately, she began, locking eyes with me like I was a child again. And we think it's time you finally moved on, found your own space. Stop clinging to things that don't belong to you. She reached into her purse and unfolded a sheet of paper. This is a formal notice of eviction. You have until the end of the month to pack your things and leave. There it was. Silence. Then a laugh from my brother. A smirk from my aunt. I glanced around the room and realized this wasn't just an announcement. It was a planned performance. They had coordinated this moment. My 40th birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a trap, a public dismissal from a life they believed I had overstayed. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that I had seen it coming. And I had planned my own twist long before they rehearsed theirs. 3 weeks ago, I bought the house. Quietly. Legally. From my mother's ex-husband, my father, who still had his name on the title. It was his last screw you to her before moving to Florida. We made the deal in his lawyer's office over coffee and signatures. I didn't even need a loan. I'd saved for years, waited for the right moment. And it arrived, perfectly timed, just like the birthday dinner she thought would break me. But I didn't say a word that night. Not yet. I folded the eviction notice slowly, placed it into my jacket pocket, and raised my glass with a smile that must have looked like defeat to them. Thank you, I said. I needed this. That was enough to keep their egos inflated for the rest of the night. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd finally driven me out for good. But I was only giving them a little more rope. Because tomorrow, I'd reveal the truth. And the shock would taste far better than anything they served at that table. I never really made a fuss about birthdays. Maybe it was the years of half-hearted cards or forgotten candles. But turning 40 felt more like a personal checkpoint than a celebration. Still, when my mother insisted on hosting a family dinner at the old house, the one I grew up in, the one she always reminded me was hers, I agreed, mostly out of obligation. I didn't expect gifts. I didn't expect affection. But I didn't expect a setup either. The whole thing started off quiet, a bit too formal, like everyone had rehearsed something I didn't know I was a part of. That uneasy feeling crawled into my chest the moment I walked in. The dining table had been dressed with more elegance than usual. Crystal glasses, candles, even those silver napkin holders she only brought out for the holidays. My brother and his wife sat on one side, my aunt and cousins on the other. They gave me small smiles, not warm ones, more like smug acknowledgments. I felt like I had interrupted a meeting. Something was off. Still, I smiled, sat down, played my part like I always had. I had no reason to suspect they were building up to the moment they thought would finally humiliate me. Dinner was roast beef, mashed potatoes, and overcooked green beans. My least favorite meal, which I hadn't touched since I moved out over a decade ago. My mother poured me a glass of wine like she was being generous. To 40 years, she said in a tone too sweet to be sincere. May this next decade bring you clarity, growth, and a fresh start. Everyone clinked glasses. Everyone except me. I sipped the wine because refusing it would have sparked questions, and I had no patience for another lecture about being ungrateful. I had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive in that house was to stay quiet and let them think they were winning. Then came the speech. My mother stood, her back straight, voice calm. We've all seen how hard it's been for you lately, she began, locking eyes with me like I was a child again. And we think it's time you finally moved on. Found your own space. Stopped clinging to things that don't belong to you. She reached into her purse and unfolded a sheet of paper. This is a formal notice of eviction. You have until the end of the month to pack your things and leave. There it was. Silence. Then a laugh from my brother. A smirk from my aunt. I glanced around the room and realized this wasn't just an announcement. It was a planned performance. They had coordinated this moment. My 40th birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a trap, a public dismissal from a life they believed I had overstayed. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that I had seen it coming, and I had planned my own twist long before they rehearsed theirs. 3 weeks ago, I bought the house. Quietly. Legally. From my mother's ex-husband, my father, who still had his name on the title. It was his last screw you to her before moving to Florida. We made the deal in his lawyer's office over coffee and signatures. I didn't even need a loan. I'd saved for years. Waited for the right moment. And it arrived, perfectly timed, just like the birthday dinner she thought would break me. But I didn't say a word that night. Not yet. I folded the eviction notice slowly, placed it into my jacket pocket, and raised my glass with a smile that must have looked like defeat to them. Thank you, I said. I needed this. That was enough to keep their egos inflated for the rest of the night. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd finally driven me out for good. But I was only giving them a little more rope. Because tomorrow, I'd reveal the truth. And the shock would taste far better than anything they served at that table. The silence in the house after they left wasn't empty. It was cleansing. For years, every wall had echoed with criticism and passive-aggressive remarks. Now, it echoed with nothing but peace. I sat on the couch, documents still laid out like trophies, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming something I was never allowed to own: dignity, control, peace. The house was just the symbol. I walked from room to room, touching door frames, light switches, the banister, every corner they used to claim, now fully mine. Upstairs, I opened the drawer where I kept the deed and slid the papers back in, neatly and with care. I didn't want to leave them out anymore. They had served their purpose. I wasn't worried about them coming back to contest anything. Legally, they couldn't. Emotionally, I doubt they'd dare. Their power had always rested in my silence, my obedience. The moment I stopped being the passive one, their hold cracked like old plaster. The text messages began rolling in around dusk. First from my aunt. You didn't have to humiliate your own mother like that. Then from my brother. So you think you're better than us now? I didn't reply. There was no point. People like them didn't reflect, they deflected. Then came the final one from my mother. Just 2 words. You'll regret it. I stared at the screen for a while, not angry, not even surprised. Just tired. I placed the phone face down on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the garden was still exactly how she kept it. Orderly, color-coordinated, controlling. Every rose trimmed, every bush shaped like she had micromanaged even nature. I made a mental note to rip out the hedge maze. I didn't need to be reminded of her even in the yard. I wanted this home to feel like mine in every way, not just legally. It was time to reclaim not just the space, but the spirit of it. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No noise, no tension radiating from the next room. No footsteps pacing the hallway at 2 a.m. looking for another thing to criticize. Just peace. I woke up to sunlight streaming in and the smell of my own coffee brewing, stronger than hers, bolder. I made breakfast in silence, then sat at the table and began planning the next steps. I wasn't just going to live here. I was going to rebuild everything they tried to take from me. The first thing I did was change the locks. A locksmith came within the hour, and I watched as the old keys, symbols of their reign, were made useless. I held the new key in my hand like it was a crown. After that, I contacted a contractor and began discussing renovations. Nothing dramatic, just changes that would erase the fingerprints of the past. The living room walls? Repainted. Her antique mirror in the hallway? Gone. That shrill grandfather clock that never let me sleep as a kid? Donated. With every change, the air in the house became lighter. The neighbors must have noticed something had shifted too. Mrs. Hargrove from next door waved at me for the first time in years. "Saw the movers yesterday?" she asked casually across the hedge. "Your mom finally moving out?" I nodded, smiled politely, and simply said, "Yeah, long overdue." She didn't ask more, and I appreciated that. This wasn't gossip for the neighborhood. This was personal, private, and deeply earned. By the end of the week, the house already looked and felt different. I had rearranged furniture, swapped the curtains, bought art I actually liked. And more than anything, I had made peace with my decision. Still, a part of me kept waiting for the backlash, for the confrontation. But it never came. No one returned to beg or argue. They were licking their wounds, no doubt, trying to figure out how the failure of the family had outplayed them so thoroughly. Then came a letter, hand-delivered, not from my mother, not from my brother, but from a lawyer, hers. The envelope sat on my desk for hours before I opened it. I knew it couldn't touch me. I had every legal document in place. Still, I needed to know how far they were willing to go. Inside, it was exactly what I expected. A request for a meeting to discuss options and possibly renegotiate ownership due to emotional and historical attachment to the property. I laughed out loud. Historical attachment? After throwing me out on my birthday? I didn't call. I didn't write back. Instead, I sent one of my own letters, through my lawyer. A single-page response that read, "The current owner has no interest in negotiation. All further contact should be through legal representation. Any attempt to enter the premises without permission will be considered trespassing." I signed it, sealed it, sent it, and that was that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving my family, I was free of them. 2 weeks passed without a word. No texts, no calls, no lawyers knocking at my door. The silence wasn't just peaceful, it was empowering. And in that time, I did something I never thought I'd do in this house. I invited people in. Not the kind of people who used to sit around that dining table and measure worth and arrogance, but real friends. People who knew me for who I was outside my family's shadow. People who had walked beside me when I was scraping by, paying rent in moldy apartments, working 2 jobs just to eat. It felt poetic to have them gather here now, inside the very house I once felt trapped in and now owned. I didn't call it a party. That word felt too much like something my mother would host. White tablecloths, performative toasts, judgment disguised as compliments. No, this was a housewarming in the truest sense. A gathering of warmth. I rearranged the living room, lit candles that smelled like freedom, put on music that reminded me I was alive and rebuilding. The doorbell rang just after 5 p.m. One by one, they arrived, college friends, old coworkers, even my landlord from 3 years ago who once let me delay rent because he believed in me. They came with bottles of wine, potted plants, and the kind of laughter that makes a place feel like home. The kitchen, once a cold command post under my mother's rule, now buzzed with chatter and smells of real food. Things we cooked together, not things I was told to serve in silence. I looked around at the faces smiling back at me and realized, for the first time in this house, I belonged. Not as a son who stayed out of guilt. Not as a placeholder waiting to be discarded, but as a man who took back control of his story. I raised my glass halfway through the evening and, without meaning to, gave a small speech. I grew up in this house, I said, but it never felt like mine. Not until recently. And the difference isn't the paperwork. It's this. All of you. This energy. This freedom. So, thank you for helping me make this place a home. They clapped. We toasted. We laughed harder. The house felt lighter than ever, and I could swear even the walls had loosened their grip. It was around 9 p.m. when the first message came through. Not a call, just a short, bitter text from my brother. So you're throwing parties now? I read it and put my phone back down without responding. Let them stew. Let them scroll through the pictures I knew some of my friends were already posting online. Let them see the joy they tried to evict from my life, now spilling from every room they once ruled. An hour later, another one buzzed in, this time from my mother. You're showing your true colors now. Loud. Disrespectful. Just like your father. Again, I said nothing. Her insults used to sting. Now they sounded like the distant whine of an engine you've long driven away from. She had no idea how much she'd freed me when she stood up with that eviction notice. She thought she was cutting me loose. She never realized I was already gone. After the last guest left, I cleaned the dishes quietly. No resentment. No one yelling about fingerprints on the fridge or coasters being forgotten. Just soft music, my own rhythm, my own space. I made tea and sat by the window, staring out into the dark street I used to sneak away from as a teenager just to breathe. Now I opened those windows wide, unafraid, unhidden. But I wasn't naive. I knew my family hadn't accepted the outcome. People like them didn't admit defeat. They stewed in it, waited for angles, plotted returns. And I sensed something was coming. Maybe another legal stunt. Maybe a public smear. Or maybe something more subtle. Emotional manipulation. The old, "we're still your family" card they loved to play. But this time, I was prepared. I had boundaries now, written in deeds and carved in steel. They could knock all they wanted, but they'd never be led in the same way again. The next morning, a neighbor slipped something into my mailbox. It was a photo, an old one, from when I was maybe 7. Standing in this same house, holding a toy plane, smiling like I still believed it was safe here. On the back, written in blue ink, were just 4 words, "Make it yours again." No name, no explanation, but I understood it. And that's exactly what I planned to do. It was a Sunday afternoon, unusually quiet. I had just finished repainting the last guest room, choosing a warm tone that made the space feel new. That room used to be the one where my mother stored what she called her essentials, a collection of china sets, antique frames, and items no one else could touch. That day, I cleared the last of them. I didn't throw them out. I boxed them, labeled them, and moved them to the garage. It wasn't out of sentimentality. It was out of preparation. I had a feeling I'd need those boxes soon, not for display, but for closure. The knock came at 2:17 p.m. 3 quick raps. No doorbell. Just like always. I opened the door, and there she stood. My mother. Behind her, my brother and aunt flanked her like backup dancers to a routine they hoped would play differently this time. She wore black, though there was no funeral, and a pair of sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. She always did love dramatics. My brother avoided my eyes. My aunt had a polite smile plastered on her face, like she'd rehearsed civility in the mirror and hoped it would be enough to earn her entry. "Can we come in?" my mother asked, her voice softer than I remembered. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside, let the silence hang, and watched as they walked into my house. I say with deliberate emphasis, not just legally, not just financially, but spiritually. Every inch of that space now bore my fingerprints, not hers. The rug was different. The photos on the wall were mine. Even the air smelled of my lavender diffuser, not the stifling rose spray she used to overuse like it was holy water. She noticed the changes. Her gaze swept over the room like a hawk searching for weakness. But I offered none. They sat awkwardly on the couch, and I stayed standing. I wanted the height advantage. For once. "We didn't come to fight," she began, taking off her glasses. "We came to talk." "Talk or ask for the house back?" I asked. A pause. "We just feel," my brother started, but my mother cut him off. "I made a mistake," she said, surprising even herself, judging by the hesitation that followed. That eviction notice, it was meant to be a wake-up call, not permanent. I raised an eyebrow. You kicked me out of the house I already owned and announced it during my birthday dinner in front of the entire family. That wasn't a mistake. That was a statement. She leaned forward. We've all said things we regret. No, I corrected her. You've all said things you meant, and now regret the consequences. My aunt finally spoke. He's right. We messed up. Her voice trembled slightly. We didn't expect you to fight back like this. We thought you'd just disappear. There it was. The honesty. The slip. They didn't just want me gone. They expected me to vanish, to dissolve quietly like I'd done so many times before. They counted on my silence, on my shame. But I didn't play that role anymore. I crossed my arms. Why are you really here? My mother hesitated, then pulled out a paper from her bag. Another letter. This time not an eviction, but a petition. She wanted to host a family event in the house. A milestone anniversary. She claimed the venue she'd planned to use canceled last minute, and every other space was booked. They wanted to use my house, to celebrate a marriage that stood on the same controlling foundation she had used to try and crush me. I stared at the letter, not with surprise, not with rage, but with the kind of calm that comes when you've already made your decision long before the question is asked. No, I said simply. But you've got the space, my brother argued. It's just for one day. I shook my head. You don't get to host milestones in a place you tried to erase someone from. You're being petty, my mother snapped, the real her finally surfacing again. This house has history. Yes, I said, and it's about time I stopped letting the wrong people write it. They didn't yell. Not this time. They didn't cry either. They sat there, quietly stewing in the realization that whatever power they once had in this space was gone. My mother stood, smoothed her coat, and looked around the room once more. You've changed. Thank you, I replied. I worked hard on it. She nodded, then walked toward the door. As she stepped out, I handed her the boxes from the garage. These belong to you, I said, and so do the memories inside them. Take them. I'm not carrying them anymore. She looked at the boxes, then back at me. She didn't say a word, just turned and left. And this time, when the door closed, it stayed closed for good. Weeks passed after that last visit, and not a single knock returned to my door. The silence was different now, no longer tense or expectant. It was final. That chapter of my life, the one where I played the scapegoat, the disappointment, the ungrateful child, had closed for good. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't hoping they'd see me, or that they'd understand the years they'd stolen from me with their judgment and control. The house was mine, yes. But more importantly, I was mine. My decisions, my boundaries, my peace, untouched by their chaos. I began to fill the space slowly, carefully. Not with things, but with meaning. I hung up old photos, not of the family that tried to erase me, but of people who mattered. Friends who had shown up when life collapsed. Mentors who had guided me when my own parents only ever pointed out what was wrong. There was one wall I dedicated to handwritten notes and little keepsakes. Proof of love, laughter, and loyalty from people who never needed a reason to support me. That wall became my favorite place in the house. A daily reminder that I wasn't alone, and I never really had been, even when it felt that way. I also started inviting joy back in. I hosted monthly dinners, not elaborate ones, just warm meals with good people and honest conversations. Laughter filled the rooms where lectures once echoed. Kids of my friends played on the floors where I used to sit silently, afraid to speak out of turn. The transformation was more than visual, it was spiritual. Every wall painted, every chair moved, every light bulb replaced felt like another brick taken off my chest. I even adopted a dog, something I never thought I'd do because growing up, I was told animals were too messy and too much trouble. But this little rescue mutt brought a kind of comfort that no person ever had in that house. She slept by the fireplace and followed me from room to room like she knew the house had once been haunted, and now she was guarding it. One Saturday morning, I stood outside trimming the hedges. The same hedges that used to be manicured with surgical precision by my mother. I shaped them however I pleased now, uneven on purpose, messy, alive, free. That's when Mr. Alton, the elderly neighbor, strolled over and leaned on the fence. He lived 2 doors down since I was a kid. Never said much beyond the weather. You've done a lot with the place, he said. Yeah, I replied. Tried to make it feel like a home. He nodded. You've succeeded. First time this place has looked lived in instead of looked at. You know what I mean. I did. More than he knew. You ever hear from them? He asked gently. No, I said. And I don't expect to. He nodded again and tipped his cap before heading back. That was enough conversation for both of us. It was strange. The kind of peace that settled when you stopped waiting for explanations, stopped begging for accountability. They'd never admit they were wrong. But that didn't matter anymore, because I no longer needed their permission to feel whole. One evening, I pulled out a photo album I hadn't opened in years. Not the family ones, just mine. Snapshots of milestones I had achieved quietly. Graduation. First car. The startup I had launched and lost. The second one I built better. The volunteer trip to Morocco. The night I got up on stage to read a poem I wrote in secret. All these things that made me who I was, and yet were never celebrated back then. But here, now, in this house, I celebrated them. One by one. Sometimes with people, sometimes just with a glass of wine and my own pride. I had learned to clap for myself. On the anniversary of the birthday dinner, the day they tried to humiliate me, I didn't throw a party or post a dramatic message. I simply lit a candle in the kitchen, cooked my favorite meal, and watched the sunset from the front porch. The dog at my feet. Music playing low. No voices raised. No tension in the air. Just the sound of a life rebuilt from the ashes they thought would bury me. And when night came, I turned out the lights, locked the doors of the house they no longer had the keys to, and went to bed knowing one thing with absolute certainty: they evicted me from a house I already owned. But they could never evict me from the life I chose to claim. If you enjoyed this story and believe in standing up for yourself no matter who tries to tear you down, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength always wins in the end. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life.